After last week's horror show against Brentford and with only 3 wins at home last season, Saturday's game against Newcastle is an absolute must win. So, let's look at how we do it, starting with the lineups. Starting with the defence, I would go for a doggy over Andy Robertson for this game, simply because of the fact that I wouldn't want Robertson getting caught in a foot race with Anthony Elanga. Elanga is one of the quickest players in the Premier League, and a doggy is much pacier and much more athletic than Robertson. At right back, I'm hoping Pedro Porro's fit for this game because Archie Gray struggled against Brentford, and let's face it, he's a central midfield player. At centre half, I'm also really hoping that Mickey van der Ven is fit for this encounter because Newcastle's main strength is the pace and the power in their forward line. Again, I wouldn't fancy Marcos Senesi one-on-one with Asula. Van der Ven matches up far better. For the midfield, I would start with Tonali, Bentancur and Fernandes, simply for the fact that we need control in the centre of the park, but also take notice of the shape. I'd set up essentially with Tonali as the 6 and Bentancur and Fernandes playing as number 8s. This game doesn't lend itself to playing with a dedicated number 10, and I'll get into the reasons why in a couple of minutes. These 3 players can provide the control we need, and I'd fancy them to dominate the Newcastle 3 of Wissa, Stur and Miley. Up top, I'm throwing Marmoush and Savinho straight in alongside Dom Solanke. Richarlison was absolutely hopeless against Brentford, and we need the ball to stick to our centre forward when it goes into him, especially when he's surrounded by the pace of Marmoush and Savinho. Now, judging by the Liverpool game, I think Newcastle posed 2 main threats, so let's get into how to defend those effectively. Newcastle's main threat comes from the counter-attack, and I think Liverpool made a fundamental mistake when defending this. Ryan Gravenberch, their sitting midfielder, basically went beyond the 2 players that Newcastle leave ready to counter-attack. Up on screen here are the images of when the counter-attack started for Newcastle, and note the position of Gravenberch. He's gone too far up the field. And so here's how we defend it. Pay close attention to the positions of Marmoush, Tonali and the 2 centre-halves. This scenario is if a doggy has overlapped Marmoush on the outside and has the ball at his feet. Firstly, Marmoush must not head into the penalty area and must stay roughly in the position shown here, and I'll explain why in a second. Sandro Tonali must be disciplined and must not go beyond Yohan Wissa or William Asula. One of them can stay free, Asula in this example, so if the ball gets cleared and breaks to Wissa, Tonali can engage him, hold him up or foul him if he needs to. In the event that the ball breaks to the free player, depending on who is closest, Marmoush or Van der Ven can engage, and whichever one goes to engage, the other one must immediately go to track Anthony Elanga and stop him from breaking into the space he'll have in front of him. Both Marmoush and Van der Ven are lightning quick, and they must be the ones to limit the threat of Elanga on the break. If Marmoush heads down the line in possession, a doggy must stay with Elanga in the event that the ball breaks loose and they go on the counter-attack. On the other side, Pedro Porro must stay goal side of Barnes because if Newcastle do clear the attack, he will make his way towards our penalty area at pace, and Porro must give himself enough of a head start to track Barnes comfortably. If we set up like this, we can still commit 3 players, Fernandes, Solanke and Savinho, into the penalty area and still be defensively sound if the move breaks down. Bentancur can patrol the edge of the box and hit a shot if the ball breaks his way. Now, I think the second threat that Newcastle pose is isolating our fullbacks one-on-one with their very tricky and very pacey wingers, especially Elanga. And this is the main reason why the midfield has to be set up with a 6 and 2 8s. This diagram represents the Newcastle shape if they build up through possession. Barnes and Elanga always stay very wide with the intention of isolating the opposition fullbacks one-on-one. Typically, if you're going to double up on the opposition wingers to defend, you use your own wide players to track back and do the defensive work. Now, I think we should do it differently, and let me explain. In this scenario, Anthony Elanga has the ball and he's looking to beat a doggy. Elanga is very dangerous in the fact that he can either go down the line or inside equally as effectively. Barnes prefers to cut inside and try to hit shots at goal. You can see here that, in the regular way of defending this situation, Marmoush is tracked back to defend the space inside and a doggy tries to show Elanga down the line, stop him getting that cross into the box. Every other player is basically man for man with their opposite number, and so the defence is set up nicely, and it's just down to the individual players to follow their runners and win their duels. However, I think we can defend this much more efficiently and also defend it in a way that allows us to spring an effective counter-attack. Let's start with the defensive part. Rather than pulling Marmoush and Savinho all the way back to defend the opposition wingers, I will want them to take up these positions, and I also want Solanke to drop into the midfield and pick up a player that Matheus Fernandes will leave free, because he's going to come out of the centre and go to defend the space that is inside of Elanga. Now, if the play takes this shape, and unless Elanga can somehow beat a Doggy and Fernandes, Newcastle can only go all the way back to their own goalkeeper because there's no other options. Even the passing lane to the centre-backs is blocked because of the position that Marmoush is taking up. In the scenario where the move breaks down and we get hold of the ball, we have two out balls, Marmoush and Savinho, who have clear space in front of them to run into. Malik Thiaw and Botman are both fairly quick for centre-backs, but in a 50, 60 yard foot race, they're going to come out second best 9 times out of 10 against the pace of Savinho and Marmoush. Now, other than those two scenarios, I don't think Newcastle pose much more of a threat. They've obviously got pace and power in the form of Elanga, Wissa, Asula, but we've talked about how to deal with that. But I think Liverpool made them look good basically by overcommitting their midfield players. As long as our players are disciplined and follow some very simple instructions, we can take the upper hand quite effectively. Now, obviously you can't control every single situation that occurs in a 100-minute game of football. But if our players keep their discipline, keep their concentration, win their duels, we stand a very, very good chance of winning this game. The final thing I want to cover is how we escape the Newcastle press when we want to try and play out from the back. Now, Brentford had a lot of joy against us last weekend by basically pressing very high, going man for man, blocking every single passing lane. I think with a bit of simple movement from just a couple of players, we can open those passing lanes and spring the attack. Let me explain. Up here on the screen is typically how it will look from a goal kick. And as you can see, every player outside the box is tightly marked and there are pretty much zero options in terms of attempting to pass out from the back. This is where we need to outsmart Newcastle and disrupt their press, and this is how we do it. As soon as Van Hecke receives the ball, Asula will head into the box to shut him down. Now, the last thing you want Van Hecke to do is play a square pass back to Kinski or over to Van der Ven. So I think this simple movement from Bentancur and Pedro Porro opens up a very clear passing lane straight out to Savinho, and we know that Van Hecke can hit a good pass. Even if Barnes doesn't take the bait and stays roughly in his starting position, Miley will have no choice but to go with Bentancur, as he is essentially running beyond the midfield and going straight onto the back line. And this is a very simple movement from two players that opens up this lane for Van Hecke. As Van Hecke is hitting that pass to Savinho, Sandro Tonali must move into the space vacated by Miley because of the movement of Bentancur. And then Savinho has that pass back into Tonali immediately available. That means your best passer receives the ball in space and with 4 players in front of him. Bentancur, Savinho, Solanke and Marmoush. And straight away, you're on top of the Newcastle backline with 3 players, pacey players, that can run in behind. We can do the same thing on the opposite side if Van der Ven receives the first pass from Kinski, with a Doggy and Fernandes carrying out the same instructions. Now, if we manage to pull this pattern off a few times early in the game, Newcastle will almost certainly react, but they'll react in a way that we want them to. They'll either abandon the press altogether, which will allow us to play out more comfortably from the back, or they'll keep the press and they'll drop their 2 centre-halves a bit deeper to deal with that ball in behind that's coming from Tonali. In either scenario, I still feel we've got the advantage. And so those 2 simple movements from those 2 players really opens up the game for us. And again, I have to caveat that no plan is perfect and there will be scenarios where Newcastle turn the ball over, they might press us, one of our players might take a bad touch. You can't control everything, but there's simple instructions. Top-level Premier League players should be able to carry out those instructions, and so that's what I think we should do. And other than everything I've described, it's basically up to the players. They've got to work hard, they've got to win their duels, they've got to battle, they've got to fight for the shirt, they've got to run more than the Newcastle players, they've got to stand up to them physically, all the basics of top-level football. Like I said earlier, I genuinely think that Liverpool made Newcastle good by overcommitting their midfield and making some really fundamental errors. By adopting the tactics I've outlined in this video, and I think they're pretty simple to be fair, but they're effective, I think we can get the win, get that monkey off our back, and then head into the next game with renewed confidence. Let's get behind the boys and let's see what happens on Saturday. Thanks for watching. Come on, you Spurs.